Hi, and welcome to our webinar today on Donovan, Scale's AI-powered decision-making platform. My name is Catherine Harris, and I lead our defense deployment team here at Scale. Scale is a dual-use technology company working to accelerate the development of AI applications for commercial and public sector customers. Within the national security community, we help the DoD and other U.S. government agencies achieve AI overmatch for a very broad range of business and operational missions. One way that we do this is by helping staffs and leaders manage the tsunami wave of data and information that's coming at them every day to help them make more informed, timely, and decisive decisions. Specifically, our latest product, Donovan, brings safe, secure, and trusted large language models to classified U.S. government networks and use cases. My colleague, Dan Tadros, will lead you through a demo of Donovan. Dan leads Scale's federal delivery team, and he has personally lived the pain that we are helping our U.S. government customers with today. He's a 12-year veteran of the Marine Corps and was also a plank holder at the Joint AI Center. Dan, over to you.
Thanks, Catherine. Pleasure to be speaking with everyone today. So I'm going to bring up some slides and we'll talk about Donovan, and more importantly, we'll start with how Donovan is really supporting the military application, and then we'll dive into a little bit more detail about what Donovan actually is. So at a high level, why did we develop Donovan? So beyond Scale's expertise in large language models, we have a number of veterans such as myself on staff, and we've identified that this is a problem that every single member that has operated in the last 20 years has felt. On the left, you'll see a combined air operations center where hundreds of staff are responsible for monitoring the air war or monitoring the operations within an area of responsibility. These individuals are overtaxed and overburdened with the amount of data that comes in on any given time, and they're working very hard and diligently to make the best decision or to identify the best information to inform commanders' decision-making. On the right is actually which is a much smaller scale example of this, is actually a photo from when I was operating in the Philippines, and it's a small COC that was supporting a MAGTF size element. The problem is still the same regardless of the scale. The amount of data, emails, chat, and information that was coming into that command center was well beyond the ability of any one person to manage. So with that in mind, we took the challenge to be understood as this way: that ever since the advent of the Napoleonic staff structure, the way that militaries operate has not really evolved. We've applied new tools in the sense of PowerPoint instead of acetate, and Word documents instead of handwritten notes. But the problem has just become more and more unmanageable. So now what we have is individuals operating in these command posts and in these various levels of military leadership that are responsible for managing across all of these various fields, but no new ways have come about to be able to deal with that large amount of information. We've seen some improvements in this when it comes to the intelligence process and computer vision, where the application of computer vision helped sort through all of that data that was coming in and all of that imagery that was being collected. But up until recently, there was no way to really focus on applying the same kind of AI capabilities to all of the unstructured text that is used to make an informed decision. So this is where that pain really lies. Across these various personas of leadership, intelligence analysts, and ops and plans, they're forced to work across all of these documents in real time and try and come up with the best decision, the best answer as possible. So there at some point comes to a point where you can't just throw more people at the problem, and you have to think a little bit differently. And that's where Donovan comes into play. Where we feel Donovan is best constrained currently is if we think about the OODA loop, the observe, orient, decide, and act process, Donovan best fits through observe and orient in order to inform decision makers on the way that they decide to take a particular course of action, and then they can then move forward with acting on that course of action. The intent is to not replace humans with the application of large language models, but to augment their intelligence. And the way that you do that is that you maintain the doctrine that all military members have been taught, which is the joint operating planning process, military decision-making process. And this, by maintaining these frameworks and applying Donovan in the right way, you can responsibly apply large language models to make a better and more informed decision. Now that we understand a little bit about why we think that Donovan is a good fit for military application, we can talk about what the actual application is. So Scale takes an enterprise approach to fielding large language models, which means starting from the foundation model, moving up through the data, moving to the ability to create, deploy, and evaluate models that are being developed, and then finally being able to field those applications into a system like Donovan. Donovan in and of itself is not a large language model, but instead is an application for the access to large language models and the ability to monitor those language models' performance. So the way that we do this is, first, with any AI technique, I think it's important to always maintain a test and evaluation methodology. So Spellbook as a platform allows us to do a few different things. It allows us to speed up app development. It allows you to essentially take your large language model and make it more fungible to the point where it could be deployed into multiple different applications, not just Donovan. So you could build your own LLMs, you could do your fine tuning, and then as it relates to automatic prompts, it allows you to do A/B comparisons of your models and to develop and to evaluate how well they do against a set of prompts to those models. This is important because large language models, unlike a computer vision application, there is no ground truth. So we have to look at it from a perspective of qualitative assessment from model A to model B. Once we do that, you'll see that we have the next step, which is the red teaming analysis. So in partnership with the White House, Scale is proposing a framework that will be deployed at DEF CON 31. This approach will develop a framework to be able to evaluate the risks associated with a large language model. So how susceptible is a large language model to instruction injection, prompt disclosure, and then trying to work through the process to develop guardrails to prevent cybersecurity hacking, minimize the amount of bias that is associated with any AI model, and also minimize the sources of hallucination. Once you've gone through the process to evaluate which model is best fielded for your application and red team that analysis, the aspect that really makes a large language model move from 70% performant to 90 some odd percent performant in your particular mission area is the process of human feedback, is the approach of RLHF, reinforcement learning with human feedback. What this allows is to take these large language models that have been trained on an enormous corpus of data and pull their performance to be more in line with what a particular application would require. This is the capability where Scale has provided for OpenAI and other such vendors and allowed for these large language models to burst onto the commercial scene. So to recap, the way that we kind of approach the development and deployment of large language models is to not focus on the model itself, but focus on the process in which we were able to develop it. So that means taking these large language models, doing an evaluation to determine, based on your bespoke requirement, how well does that model perform in that environment? So if you are a logistics officer, how well does it answer those types of questions versus intelligence versus operations? Once you've done that evaluation and identified which model is the most performant for your application, you can then take it to that red teaming approach and identify if there are any vulnerabilities associated. The model can then be fielded into Donovan and monitored in its deployment. As part of its deployment and monitoring, we are then able to pull that data back and as well as augment that data through the RLHF process. Once you've completed that process, you're able to then push it back through the model evaluation and determine how well your model has improved compared to its baseline. And by continually iterating through this process, we're able to continually deploy a more performant model for the purposes that for a specific military application. So what would this really result in the outcome? So Donovan, for national security, we believe will actually enhance military decision-making and allow the staff to explore those branches and sequels and explore the data that is available to them more broadly. So this includes being able to have such capabilities as plugins, where you're able to ask the large language model to plot information and do some other capabilities such as translation of non-English speaking languages into something that is then understandable by the staff. As a vignette, part of our process and part of our pathway to deploying Donovan currently on a classified network was to experiment very closely with the Marine Corps School of Advanced Warfighting. During a 2-week exercise, we deployed Donovan into their planning process, and we were able to see how the end users deployed and integrated this system. And what we saw was some really interesting capabilities where during Red Force planning, they would use adversary documents or nations that we're in current competition with and be able to understand how does their doctrine differ from US doctrine. So when developing those courses of action, they weren't making applying US bias to another country's application and methodologies. We also saw that during Blue Force planning, they were able to pull a larger pool of authoritative documents. So instead of being forced to narrow the application and narrow the domain of data available to them, they were able to explore things much more deeply. And with that, I'm going to pause this slide deck, and we'll bring up Donovan and show you a few examples of some of these queries. So here you see a approach. So inside of Donovan, this is one of the chat logs that we saw occur during the experiences with the Marine Corps University. So exploring the economic linkages between countries is a way to better understand the operational environment and determine what other levers of national power might be available. So in this case, a user was able to ask what economic linkages exist between Cambodia and Vietnam. And because there is a set corpus of documents, this capability is then able to reference that corpus of documents. So you can see if I were to open up this, what it's doing is it's pulling in a particular report from the Integrated Country Strategy of Vietnam. And this was able to pull from page 13 of a report that's probably over 50 pages long. The idea is that without the access to Donovan, a user would be forced to default to past experiences, which is largely Control F to find its way through all of these documents. So if you don't know exactly what you're looking for, the chances of being able to find it are relatively low. But because of the way that a large language model works and its understanding of context, it's able to then take this and look through all of these documents and provide a synthesized response that the user can then read through and explore each of these references more deeply as required, thus making it easier for the user to make a more informed decision about how they would want to move forward with their decision-making process. And then from that point, they can continue to explore further details of the information available. So I'll pull up one other application here, or one other stream of thought, and then I think we might open it up for questions at that point. So in this case, this is a collection of open source reporting that was consolidated for the purposes of this exercise. So in these open source reportings, including navigational warnings and other types of news reports that were deployed. So you can see what you're able to do is pull up these documents from the synthesized response, and you'll see that like the daily media wrap-ups from 8 April, 1 August, 4 August. These are across a pretty broad range of dates, and some of these documents can be hundreds of pages long. So allowing for the user to be more targeted in what they're pursuing and find those nuggets in the haystack of data that's available to them allows them to explore these areas much more deeply. So from there, I'll pause and I will, I believe, open it up for any other questions.
So it looks like we have one question that came in. It says, how do you curate the data used in Donovan?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I think that with any AI approach, data is at the forefront of how you move forward. So the way that we did this for specifically the Marine Corps University is we worked with subject matter experts to identify what is a balanced set of data that would be available to support the application for the students that we're going to leverage this capability. As we move into some of those larger scale exercises where we're doing the same capability but on different networks, what we've done is we've also taken a very thoughtful approach to being able to curate that data to ensure that we don't introduce any unnecessary bias and make sure that the documents that are being loaded are authoritative in nature.
Good. Another one that came in, a question is, what is Scale's approach toward test and evaluation as part of Spellbook?
Yeah, so test and evaluation for large language models is still a largely unsolved problem. But the way that we can start taking some measurable steps forward is to take the approach of doing comparison testing against during multiple prompts. So in other words, you have two large language models, you're able to ask the same prompt, and you're able to ask variations of that prompt against both of those large language models. What that allows you to do is better understand the performance of those models and where they might fail and where they might be where they might be successful.
Great. Another one that just came in, when conducting queries in Donovan, do you have to use Boolean logic or do you use the tool in a more narrative or Socratic method?
Yeah, and this is where Donovan really is a differentiator from past experiences with natural language processing. So as opposed to having to maintain a Boolean approach where I'm putting words into quotations and or operators, you can ask a very open-ended question and the information will come back as a result. So Donovan uses a combination of semantic search and the large language models to be able to support the development.
It looks like we have another question that's asking about use cases. Dan, you presented a lot of different use cases for staff. Where are we seeing the most opportunity and demand and need from DoD customers? I can start with that one.
Sure.
We see it both on business operations and sort of military functions. You know, a lot of staffs and front offices, everything from, you know, your J1 function through business operations, IT, a lot of legal functions, contracting functions, a lot of those business operation functions can very easily and very, very quickly benefit from technologies like this. And then we're also seeing it in traditional military functions, planning and operations and other things as well. So really across, if you think all of the, you know, J1 through J9 functions, we see it in all of them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Pause here in case anyone that's live wants to add another question. Okay. I'll wrap up real quick and then turn it over to you to Dan for the last word. Let me wrap up with one more thing. It looks like some questions are still coming in, but I'd like to invite everyone and let you know that for all of government and military attendees today, we are doing a 7-day trial for market research purposes of Donovan. So if you go to Scale's website and do a /Donovan, so scale.com/Donovan, probably next week, we'll be posting the ability for people to register for a free 7-day account. We've pre-populated with a series of data sets and some example prompts. So you can have hands-on experience at the keyboard, playing with Donovan, prompting questions, just experiencing what a technology like this can do. Again, that's open for all U.S. government and military personnel with a .mil or .gov email address. Free 7 days. Go to our website next week. It'll be available on a rolling basis. So maybe the next couple of weeks aren't good for you, but in a few months, maybe you want to take a look. It'll be available then as well. So I'd encourage everyone to stay up to date by visiting our website and following us on social media and taking advantage of the trial.
Yeah, and I think we actually have 2 more questions that came in. So can Donovan work with a private database? If so, how do you control the confidentiality of that information? So that's a great question. The way that we have this developed is that we can deploy to your private network and have that bespoke LLM for your purposes. So this allows the confidentiality and avoids some of the challenges of sending your questions and your data to a separate server elsewhere. So Donovan can be deployed on premise or in a virtual private cloud to prevent any kind of data leakage of trade secrets. And then I see there's another question here about what are the opportunities you see for promoting interoperability and insight outputs, portability with other systems and decision processes. So I will say that, the way that we have designed Donovan is to be interoperable with existing systems of record and to be able to plug into those systems as required. So instead of having to come to Donovan to ask the questions or to interact with the LLMs that you've deployed, you can push those LLMs and that capability to your various systems of record. So I think that is probably like just a foundational approach towards interoperability, which is we want to make this as open as possible. Can Donovan interact with and produce code? So that would be dependent upon the large language model that you put into Donovan. So as I mentioned, Donovan itself is not a large language model. It is a way to interact with large language models. And there are a number of large language models that are very good at code for very specific coding languages or just generically across. So absolutely, we would be able to load an LLM that we have trained for whatever coding language or whatever coding purposes that you might need, and then be able to deploy those inside of Donovan as a co-pilot to your coding efforts, to your software development efforts. Let's see, can you discuss how the data sources in Donovan are curated, and also discuss a little more about how Spellbook is used in conjunction? Of course. So the way that we curate the data sources is we usually leverage subject matter experts in the field that you would want to apply it to. So for military operations, what we would do is if we were looking for methods to leverage a large language model for logistics, we would bring in subject matter experts in logistics and ensure that the documents that are being loaded are authoritative in nature. So one of the things that we want to avoid is anything where, a science fiction novel accidentally gets loaded into your curated data set, and now the large language model is able to leverage, teleportation to get your logistics there faster. So using those subject matter experts, we can curate that data set to ensure that the LLM has authoritative data to leverage. We then would supplement that curated data with data that is specific to your mission area. So from there, the model is able to continue to leverage that data in a more effective manner. And Spellbook and how Spellbook is used in conjunction. So Spellbook, because of its kind of like low-code development approach, and because of its ability to do A/B testing of various models, we use Spellbook as a way to continually add new models into Donovan, and then also evaluate those models to make sure that we are adding the right model to Donovan based on the application. And I think we have one more question coming in. Do the LLMs have to be commercially licensed? I don't believe so. I think that we are open to bringing in open source models and then helping you tune those open source models to your application. So if you think about it from this perspective, large language models are becoming more and more prolific. The capability to get a large language model off of GitHub is relatively easy at this point, with a lot of open source models becoming available. But even if you were to make that model available and take that open source model, it will still require some fine tuning to get it to the point where it's really powerful for your distinct application. And that's where Scale's like development ops cycle is where is how we're differentiated, is that we're providing the tools and the resources to deploy, train, and develop your own large language models, as opposed to having to be completely dependent upon commercially licensed models or what's available in the open source ecosystem.
And I'd also add the ability to constantly try new models and update those models as your mission requires. Models can be out of date quickly, and the ability to rip and replace models and put them into a system and deploy them against a data set is something that we anticipate and have heard customers ask for. And you can do that in Donovan by bringing in different models, again, whether they're commercial or your own custom-built models or models that we help you build, to be able to constantly update your operations with new models. All right, well, thank you everyone for joining us today. We will send out the on-demand link of this recording for everyone that registered and participated today. And again, I'll remind you to check out our website next week and on a go-forward basis to participate in the trial. Again, it's scale.com/Donovan-trial is the website to sign up for the free 7-day trial for market research purposes. Thank you all so much.
Thanks.